On people before profit solidarity. 3 minutes, Deputy Richard Boyd-Barrett.
Taoiseach, this Friday in the District Court, beside the Four Courts, 5 households, families and individuals are going to taste the very bitter fruits of this government's failure to protect tenants from ruthless vulture funds, to protect them against no-fault evictions, to offer them alternatives when they are faced with homelessness, either in terms of social housing or private rental accommodation that they could actually afford and that is within the HAP limits. The families and individuals in St Helens Court will face an application by a vulture fund, Mill Street Projects, to evict them into homelessness this Friday. These are decent, ordinary, working people who have done absolutely nothing wrong. They've always paid their rent. They are still paying their rent. They've never been guilty of any antisocial behaviour. They had a community that has been wrecked. Used to be 20 tenants there, and they have been bullied out, the rest of the tenants bullied out by 2 successive vulture funds, tortured by these vulture funds over 4 years. And now they are facing homelessness. And this is because of your government's refusal to ban no-fault evictions. There is no justification that should allow the law to facilitate a vulture fund for no other reason than profit, to put people on the street. But our law allows it. There is absolutely no justification for the fact that in the same block, there are 12 and now maybe 15 empty apartments sitting beside the apartments from which these tenants are now to be evicted, which the landlord claimed in the RTB they wanted to rent, but strangely enough, they won't rent it to the tenants they are about to evict. And those apartments are allowed sit there for 2 years, and I have flagged it again and again and again. Why is compulsory purchase powers not used to get hold of these empty apartments that could not only prevent people going on the street, but could house 12 to 15 other families? And what alternatives are available to these tenants? Under the HAP limits, the individuals there have a maximum rent that they can seek of €990 for a 1-bedroom apartment. In Dún Laoghaire today, the cheapest 1-bedroom apartment is €1,300. The next one is €1,600 and the next one is €1,900. The maximum that the families can look for is €1,900 for a 3-bed apartment. The cheapest available in Dún Laoghaire at the moment is €2,400. All of them are goosed, forced into homelessness because we have failed to protect not just these tenants but any other tenants faced with this situation.
To respond uninterrupted.
About 6 pieces of legislation have already been passed to protect tenants' rights generally across, and in particular in terms of the Tyrrell Amendment, as you know, which provides that where a landlord proposes to sell 10 or more units within a single development at the same time, that sale is subject to the existing tenants remaining in situ, other than in exceptional circumstances. Now, you have raised, to be fair to you, the situation in St Helens involving 5 tenants or 5 families, which is unacceptable. Under existing constitutional frameworks, there is a balance to be struck in terms of how far we can go in terms of legislation. And any proposal that would just remove a landlord's right to terminate a tenancy could be subject and would carry the risk of a constitutional challenge. The Housing Commission, I think, we've asked the Housing Commission to prioritise consideration of an amendment, a constitutional amendment regarding a referendum on housing in respect of these issues, because I think fundamentally that's where we have to go to make sure that situations like this do not happen in the manner that it is happening. I think Dún Laoghaire, Rathdown County Council have said to the Department of Housing that they're going to do everything they possibly can to ensure that the 5 families do not fall into homelessness as a result of what is transpiring there with the landlord in this case. And the Commissioner of Housing is looking at issues around tenure, standards, sustainability and quality of life issues. You know that the government has provided for the tenancies of unlimited duration through the Residential Tenancies Amendment Act of 2021, which means basically that all new tenancies created on or after the 11th of June 2022 would become tenancies of unlimited duration after 6 consecutive months in occupation under the tenancy without a valid notice of termination having been served. Everything that possibly can be done, we're doing within the legal constraints to protect tenants as much as we possibly can. Ultimately, in the programme for government, we have committed to a referendum on housing, and I think it's important that that work, it is being prioritised by the Housing Commission, but I think that is fundamental to the core issue that you've raised.
Taoiseach, first of all, can I invite you on behalf of the tenants, and indeed Sinn Féin and the Soc Dems and Labour and anybody who can, to get down to the courts to support those tenants. There'll be a solidarity rally on Friday. None of the things you have just mentioned would protect these tenants. The tenancies of indefinite duration still allow a vulture fund to evict tenants under these circumstances. The constitutional protection, constitutional obstacles to protecting tenants, I don't buy. During COVID, you brought in an eviction ban under pressure. And what happened? The number of people going into homelessness fell from over 10,000 down to 7,000, and would have kept falling except for the fact that you lifted that ban. You were able to do it during COVID, you can do it now. Why don't you do it? The Tyrrellstown Amendment says if there's more than 10 tenants we can't, in a multi-unit complex, we can't evict them. So this vulture fund tried 10, didn't get away with it, and then came back and evicted under 10, and then bullied the rest out. If you can do it for 10, you can do it for anybody.
Thank you, Deputy.
Protect them from unfair evictions. Do not allow vulture funds to evict people
Deputy,
for profit, and control rents so they cannot charge these extortionate rents.
To respond.
The constitutional framework does restrict. It was possible during COVID because of lockdown. 5-kilometre rule. The legal advice was that in that context you could do it in a lockdown scenario, but you couldn't do it outside of that, where people could move to get accommodation, alternative accommodation. When people were restricted to the 5-kilometre rule, they clearly, the judgment was made legally that we could freeze evictions. That honestly was the legal advices that were presented to us in that regard. And on the 10 houses versus 5, again, it was an issue of balance in terms of how at risk, if you did anything less, would one be constitutionally and open to challenge. Because there are competing rights here in terms of the Constitution and in terms of the...
That's poor law. Comfort for decent tenants being evicted.
But that's what I'm trying to give an honest answer to you. In terms of, there are always constraints on the legislature because we have a written constitution. That's why we live in the kind of democracy we do. We're one of the few countries in the world that have a written constitution, which is a limitation on the executive and on the Oireachtas.
Thank you, Taoiseach Armagad.
And that's why, but we have the power through...
It includes the common good. It includes the common good.
If we so wish.
The only power I have is in relation to time now, so if we could, just a little bit.